There we go. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Antionetta, and she's going to introduce herself, and we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you.
Thank you, Charles. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Antionetta Kelley. I am the founder and principal consultant of the Right Consulting Group. I am originally from Boston, Massachusetts. I've got 10 plus years of experience in grant writing. I have my master's degree in education policy from the Harvard Graduate School of Education. The Right Consulting Group specializes in really all things writing, but primarily grant writing and proposal writing. And I want to give a special thanks to the DC SBDC for inviting me back to present this workshop on 5 ways to successfully manage grant opportunities. It's my hope that we will get through the end of the workshop and you'll have more information about how to successfully secure funding for your organizations. So before I get started, feel free to jump in, interrupt, ask questions. If you have comments, feel free to comment. I do want to make this an interactive session, so feel free. And I know that Charles is going to be managing that aspect of the presentation. But the 5 topics that I want to cover today are going to be market research, outlining, narrative crafting, submission and tracking, and reporting. And I want to start us off with a basic definition of what a grant is. This is a definition that I pulled from the grants.gov website, basically stating that a grant is one of many forms of public and private assistance that can be used to fund ideas, projects, provide services, and even help stimulate the economy. When we look closely at grant categories, this is a snapshot of the different grant categories that are out there, but this list can become pretty comprehensive and pretty long, but these are pretty much the most common and popular categories. Workforce development, you might recognize as being pretty big in the grant world, veteran services, and so forth. Looking at eligibility, so typically you'll see that nonprofits are eligible for grants, but despite popular belief, small businesses might also be eligible. If you have a startup or a small business that has a social justice component to it, you would then be categorized as a social enterprise. And social enterprises are eligible to receive some grants. Also, institutes of higher education are eligible, faith-based organizations, and even different government agencies are eligible to receive grants. So that is just a little bit of background information about grants. Are there any questions or comments so far before we dive into the material? Okay. Okay, so starting out, when you're pursuing grants, you're going to start out with your market research. I like to go directly to the source. So if there's a foundation or a government agency or any kind of agency that I'm aware of that I know that I want to pursue, I'll go directly to their website and find current grant opportunities. If I don't see anything listed on the website, I'll even call or send an email to see if I might have missed anything. After doing that, I'll then check third-party websites. So I have here grants.gov. If you're going to be pursuing federal grants, I'll say go ahead and get familiar with grants.gov if you're not already. And then there's also a site called GrantWatch, which does require, it has a paid subscription, but I really like GrantWatch because you can really narrow your search by location, category, and so they have a really good information about private and public grants. Once you've got all of your different grants together that you've researched, I recommend putting together a spreadsheet. It's called an opportunities forecasting spreadsheet, where you would essentially capture the essential details about the grant. So what agency is putting it out? What is the award amount? When is it due? I would even recommend having a category for point of contact so that you can reach out to whoever the program officer is before you apply so that you can introduce yourself. Once you have all of this information captured, then you would go through what's called the go, no-go process and really eliminate the opportunities that don't align with your organization at the moment and focus on the ones that do. Any questions about market research before we move on to outlining? Okay. All right, so you've done your market research and now you are at the outlining stage. I would suggest doing your outline before you start to write. There are some things that might be required that may need a little bit of lead time. And so, this is a good way for you to really organize your thoughts. So when you're putting together your outline, I would say, study the RFP from cover to cover, make sure you read every word. And then I would create a separate Word document and start putting in the different section headers from the RFP. And you can start bulleting different information that you want to capture under the different headers before you start to form your full sentences and so forth. Then you want to craft your budget, but I have a separate slide devoted to the budget, so we'll get there in a second. But you also want to identify appropriate partners and past performance examples. So typically you'll see on larger grant applications, you'll see multiple applicants, and that's because different organizations come together to partner. So if you're going to be going after a large scale grant, you want to make sure that you have your partners lined up. You've got your commitments, it could be an employment partner. And so you just want to make sure that that's all squared away. Similarly, with your past performance, a lot of what I see is that, a funder might have a template that they want you to follow. And so you just want to make sure that you have all of that information squared away before you start writing. Next, I would suggest setting an internal deadline. And I would say maybe 5 to 7 days before your proposal is due is when, you should have pins down and start to review it. And then lastly, you want to solidify your submission requirements. So this goes back to like grants.gov, for example. If you're going to be submitting through grants.gov, you want to make sure that you're already registered before you start the writing process. I think it can take up to 2 weeks to get registered in grants.gov. So that's something that you want to make sure that you have squared away before you start to write. Similarly, another foundation will have a portal. Just become familiar with that portal before you start to write so that you know that you're in good shape. Then in terms of your outlining, when we get to the budget, I would say that your budget is really important. You want to make sure that you provide as much detail as possible. So for your different categories, rather than just providing, your allotment for that category, you want to show how and why you got to that amount, show your work as your math teacher might have said to you, and really show those computations. I would also say you want to stay within your budget limits. If the grant is for $50,000, avoid proposing something for $75,000 unless you've got some skin in the game. Maybe you're going to use your own internal resources to bridge that gap, or you have a sponsor. But whatever the case may be, I would strongly suggest staying within those budget limits. And then matching fund requirements. You might see a requirement in an RFP. I'm sorry, is request for proposal. So that's what you will be responding to when you write your grant response. So matching fund requirements, typically you might see a requirement, maybe the program officer wants to see that 25% of the grant is going to be committed from an in-kind sponsor, or from a sponsor, from their in-kind sources or from their monetary sources. So if you have a matching fund requirement, that's something that you want to get solidified prior to writing. And then last but not least, I would say not to overwhelm your personnel category. So typically, I would say if you have less than 50% devoted to personnel, you're in pretty good shape. Program officers don't want to feel like you're using the program funds to just kind of float your staff. They want to see that you again have some skin in the game, and that they want to see you're investing into materials and supplies and equipment as opposed to just personnel heavy. So I think that that's pretty important as well. So that is essentially it for the outlining piece. Any questions so far before we dive into the narrative writing section?
So far, Antionetta, no questions in the chat area.
Okay, all right. Okay, so now you've done your research, you've put together your outline, and you're ready to start writing. What I'll say about writing is that it really doesn't have to be as complicated. It can be pretty straightforward if you just, answer the questions precisely. So for example, I have an example up. Department of Employment Services put an RFP out a couple of years ago. And under program description, they're asking for the applicant to identify and describe how their organization will deliver the proposed program. So you'll answer that question. But the trick here is to take your response and then compare it against the score criteria. So you'll find the score criteria usually in the back of the RFP. And you want to make sure that the response that you gave, the verbiage lines up with the verbiage in the score criteria. And if you do that, you're sure to maximize the number of points that you can get in any particular category. So I think if you follow that process, you're going to be in pretty good shape. And, you might, if you don't feel confident about how your writing and your writing style, and if you don't think it's particularly strong, you can always get some help with that. But I think, based from the basic level, you just want to make sure that you're answering the questions precisely. And then lastly, what I'll say is avoid too many cooks in the kitchen. So I would really recommend having up to 2 writers, one person working on the technical response, and then one person working on the pricing or the budget response. You might have a team of great writers, but if they all have different, writing styles, you don't want a document that just takes on a bunch of different tones and writing styles. So you want something that's consistent and clear. So I would say limit your writers to 1 to 2 and have them working on different sections entirely. Any questions on the narrative crafting before we move on? No? Okay.
No questions in the chat so far.
Okay. Well, I hope that this means that the information is helpful. Okay, so now you have submitted, hooray. You are at the point where you want to make sure that you receive confirmation that you have submitted your application. So you'll usually get an email, automated email, or maybe a personalized one, but that's important to have. And then you want to make sure that you do some debriefing. So I would say debrief with your internal team about your process for writing that proposal, what you think went well, what you think you guys can improve on for next time, and just stick to that. And I would also debrief with the agency. So whether or not you get the funding, you want to have a conversation with the agency or the foundation about, if you didn't get the funding, what you could have done differently. And if you did get the funding, just talking about next steps and just thanking them for investing in your project. And then it's the hurry up and wait phase. So you typically get a limited amount of time to submit these grant applications, and then you're asked to wait maybe 30, 60 days before you hear anything. But just know to be patient, especially if you're going after government grants for whatever reason. There's typically a longer time frame to hear back. And then lastly, your reporting. In a nutshell, this is about just doing a good job and making sure that you are in a position to get renewed for funding. So if you do get the grant, I would say schedule a meeting with the grants team upon receiving it. And then once you have that meeting, in that meeting, I would say, set a schedule between you and the grants team. And when I say the grants team, in this case, it would be the program officers for the particular agency or the foundation, but you would set a schedule with them for what you're going to submit, your expense reports, your outcomes, and any other deliverables that they might be requiring. And then I would also say maintain organized files. If you're working on a program where you're dealing with participants, clients, you want to make sure that you have actual files on them. You can be audited at any time if it's a government grant. So, you just want to make sure that you're prepared at all times. But if you do well, the reporting aspect, I really think that you strengthen your chances for getting renewed for the grant in the following year. So that brings me to the end of the presentation. I hope that you all found it useful. And feel free to ask questions and comment as you see fit. Thank you.
Antionetta, we have one question so far. Well, actually a couple. Let me take the first one. How can new potential applicants overcome past performance if it's part of the proposal?
Oh, that's a great question. What you could do is partner up with an organization that has a lot of past performance. I actually have a couple of clients that are just starting out, and they're coming up against the same challenge. But what you would do is just establish a relationship with a nonprofit that has a similar mission to you, that might have some sort of other value added service, and just asking them if they would mind sponsoring your application. And that would mean that they would be the prime applicant, and they would write you into their grant narrative as someone who would be helping to administer the grant. So short answer is to just partner up with an organization that has that past performance.
And actually, this is a follow-on. I'm asking myself, what's a good source? And I know this is a broad question, but let's say that you have a grant that there's an opportunity to team with a nonprofit. What's a good source for identifying, say, a nonprofit to connect with?
That's a good question. I typically just know off the top of my head, but perhaps you could do a Google search. And I know, I believe the Candid Foundation might be a good source.
That is, I've used that one. I've added that to a list of organizations to check on, but the Candid Foundation, yeah.
Yeah, and that's a free source. Yeah, I would start there actually, and just make a list of any organizations that you just personally have a relationship with, and ask mentors and ask for referrals.
Another question that just popped up. What advice do you have for solopreneurs? And specifically, they're coming in quick now. Let's see.
Mm-hmm.
What do you have for solopreneurs? What are common pitfalls from people writing and applying all on their own for their small startup business?
A common pitfall. I would perhaps the budget, and not dispersing the resources accordingly, if that makes sense. So I would say for a startup, they're just going to want to make sure that they're making a solid investment, and you want to make sure that your budget is capturing items that can help you leverage and scale up. So, I would say not focusing on the equipment aspect and the actual supplies and materials that'll get you to where you want to be could be a common pitfall for a startup.
And by the way, I put the Candid Foundation in the chat area. I put the name. If you Google it, it'll come up very easily. It's a bright yellow website, so you're in the right spot when you see it. Also, there was a question about the information provided today. So we will be providing the slide deck to anyone who is attending for today. We're also recording this, and it will be posted on the DCSBDC website probably by next week sometime.
Yes, thank you. And you have my contact information here. Feel free to reach out to me directly if you need any support with research, or putting together your proposal, or any other writing service. We can definitely help support.
Also, Antionetta, here's a question too. How often, or let's see, let me rephrase it a different way. There's a lot of grants coming out related to small business. And I know the styles vary. I know you mentioned about retaining information about these grants. Are there any good templates out there in terms of retaining information? I know for my government contracting clients, I have a past performance sheet that I use, but are there any good templates or good CRM systems related to to helping people working who do deal with a lot of grants?
Yeah, in terms of a CRM or a platform, I think Monday.com is pretty sufficient to tracking grants. But honestly, if you don't have it in your budget to pay for a subscription, I think I'm sorry, not Word, Excel works um, pretty well. As long as you have the appropriate categories and you're tracking it, you set a schedule for when you want to track things. I think that you'll be okay. And you don't necessarily have to invest in some sort of special software. And I can provide a sample if someone is interested in seeing what that looks like.
A couple more questions in here. Is there any public assistance in terms of helping smaller grantees prepare their tech/price proposals? Because most big organizations hire professional firms.
Yeah, actually, DSLBD, they have a lot of resources for small businesses. And actually, I want to say the DCP TAC, which is I don't want to give the wrong name, but if you Google
Procurement
DCP
Technical
TAC,
Assistance Center.
yes, thank
Yeah.
you. They have their counselors will help you review. Actually, I just became a client of theirs and submitted my first RFP, and they were there to support me in reviewing and proofreading what I put together. So they can definitely help support you or support small businesses in general.
Great. Another question. Have you ever worked with clients who are trying to get money for real estate for business? Do you have recommendations for grants that might allow you to use the money for real estate? It says I've seen a lot of grants that say that they don't allow you to use money for land, but that element is pretty integral to my business.
There could be grants out there that might allow you to use the resources for land. It's just a matter of doing a search for it. I'm actually in conversation with someone who is a potential client who is looking into the real estate aspect in terms of trying to redevelop different areas and provide like community affordable housing and essentially being a developer. And so we're in conversation now, but I'm curious to do the research to see what kind of grants will be out there to support that. But off the top of my head, I think that if you're looking at that aspect of real estate, serving a community goal, HUD will definitely, which is Housing and Urban Development, they typically have grant opportunities that come out every year for that sort of work, as well as the Department of Health and Human Services. Those are the two that I can think of, but I think that there are opportunities out there for real estate. It's just a matter of specifically what you want to do and just doing a search around that.
Another question came in. Can you kind of give us an example of what type of insurance coverage is usually required if you're going after grants?
Yeah, that's a good question. Typically, you'll just need to have a general policy.
General liability?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Thank you. A general liability policy. But I have seen if you're going to be working with specific populations like young adults, if you, for example, have a program for youth, you may need to have what's called a cyber policy, which is related to technology use. And then there is another policy related to like harassment. And I can't think of the name of that policy off the top of my head, but I do have a list somewhere that I could pull up if need be. But typically you'll just need the general liability insurance, but depending on if you're doing something complicated or something to do with sensitive populations, then you'll need to add layers onto that.
A follow-up question from the same person. Are there set-asides for grants that are located in certain zip codes?
Yeah, actually, I actually was awarded a grant in DC through the Department of Small and Local Business. It's called a Dream Grant, and that is specifically for residents of Ward 7 and 8. so that you will see those grants out there. And I think they have a couple more for other wards in DC. And even if you're in Maryland, you know, different counties will have different awards. So that's definitely very common.
And the question going back, part of the question that was asked before about insurance coverage. Let's say you have general liability. How much is it usually cost? I know I've heard quotes depending upon the size of it, like $1 million policy might be, you know, $500 to $1,000 depending upon the coverage.
Yeah, and that'll probably be for the entire year. So I don't think you're going to exceed $50 a month for your premium for a general liability policy. But don't quote me on that, you know. Obviously, it'll be different from, but if I had to give a ballpark, I would say somewhere within that, within that scale.
Yeah, if you're a company that doesn't have business insurance, you may check with your personal carrier. They may have business insurance capability, or there are companies out there that specialize specifically in various types of business insurance coverage. If you're in government contracting, that can range not only from general liability, it may also include errors and omissions, some workman's comp insurance, some even require key man insurance, but that's a topic for another day and another subject.
Yeah, thank you.
They asked us, can you repeat the name of the organization resources that you gave in an answer to with regards to the technical price proposal question?
Oh yes, DSLBD, which is the Department of Small and Local Business Development in DC, and also DCPTAC, which, Charles, if you could help me out again with the exact.
Procurement Technical Assistance Center.
Thank you.
And they're actually also part of DSLBD.
Okay.
I should also mention too, typically they require that you have an existing business in the government contracting realm and that your revenues meet a certain threshold for PTAC support. We also can help you at DC SBDC, DC Small Business Development Center. We don't have a threshold for if you're starting out or if you're in business in terms of your revenues. The only requirement that we have that you are a for-profit business and not a nonprofit.
Thank you. And also, I just thought about the Greater Washington Urban League. They have an entrepreneurship center, LEDC, WAKIF, Life Asset. These are all community-based nonprofits that help small businesses. So definitely look into those as well.
There's a really good booklet called Doing Business in DC. It's put out by WDCEP. I know we're giving you a lot of acronyms, but if you go to their website, WDCEP, I'll put it in the chat area. Just go to their website. They have a list there of resource books. They include a neighborhood overview. It also includes the Doing Business in DC. Many of these organizations that we've mentioned, they are in that Doing Business in DC booklet.
Yeah. Yep. Thank you.
Don't see any other. We still have time, folks. So if you have questions, feel free to put it in the chat. We'll give you a minute or so because some people are slow typists.
Okay.
Myself included.
Myself included.
Don't see any more questions. Obviously, Antionetta, you did a great job, as always.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
And again, someone mentioned, can they get the PowerPoint? Yes, the PowerPoint presentation will be provided to everybody who's attended that we can identify. I think I've identified pretty much everybody on here through their name in the chat. I do have one person here, Galaxy Tab A. I'm not sure who that is. Feel free to identify yourself and we'll make sure you get added. Part of what I do in the background is take attendance, and from the attendance list, I know who's on, and then those are the folks that get the information who benefit from that. A question just popped up, Antionetta. What is a good source to find grants? Some sources have a cost. I think we mentioned earlier that the Candid Foundation is a good source.
Yeah, and I'll go back to this page. Grants.gov is a good source if you're gonna go after federal grants, and then Grant Watch is a paid subscription. If you have it in your budget, I like their website, but you know, grants.gov, or just going directly to the agency's website or the foundation's website too.
Great. I don't see any additional questions. So I think this might be a good stopping point for everyone. Antionetta, if you go, yeah, great. Go to the last slide there. For those who didn't get Antonetta's information, you can take it from this slide. And again, we're going to follow up and get you a copy of the slide deck. All of you will get that shortly in the next couple days. And again, by next week, we'll post this webinar on the DC SBDC website, which I put the URL in the chat area.
Awesome.
Great, great. Well, Antionetta, thank you as always. Great presentation. We always love having you. We're going to definitely have you back again. And we encourage anyone to follow up with Antionetta with questions. And also, if we can help you, the DC SBDC can help you, feel free to follow with us. Just go to our website, dcsbdc.org. And from there, just if you're not a client, just click on the new client tab and just follow the prompts. And typically within about 48 hours, we'll have a counselor assigned to you and they'll reach out to you. So with that, again, Antionetta, thank you. And
Thank you.
as mentioned,